Good morning, everybody. How are you? I can't really say that I'm happy to be here today. I've been forced to really appear because the good people who have worked with me on Home project have been the victims of false and damaging information by the clerk of the court, Dwight Brock. I am personally devastated by this, as I think the rest of our board is, and the majority of them are here. We started this project to rehab vacant foreclosed houses in Collier County. We did 12 of those and sold each one of them to low-income families. And we're not talking just about a average rehab. We're talking about quality rehab that was done by our team. Granite countertops, paint, roofs in most cases, well water systems. And we are very proud of what we did. And it's just unfortunate that we ran into this difficulty so late in the cycle. By the way, we closed Home basically because of the market deterioration in 2010 was dissolved. It's now in its 4th year since that time, and we have faced multiple audits beginning, well, with the closeout procedure from the county all the way up till just a few weeks ago. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to Jeff Fritkin, who will give you some color and some facts regarding this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my task here is to try to demonstrate to you what exists in the public record, and by demonstrating what is in the public record, show that these allegations and innuendos are not only false and malicious, but just flat outrageous and a terrible waste of our taxpayer dollars and a misuse of office. Now, we're centering on these false allegations from Mr. Brock. He suggests that taxpayer money used for, used for this process of putting the home products on the market to low and very low income people has resulted in unaccounted for tax dollars. And what I will show you is from the public record, easily available information that just dispatches any legitimacy to that concept. And the other is the false suggestion that there were ever actual conflicts of interest presented to the Board of Home. So Mr. Barlow just gave you a brief overview of the project. I just want to very quickly explain again that the idea was to take blighted, non-code conforming houses and convert them into livable homes, which then could be made available using state grant money and federal grant money to provide a good place for families that are in what is known as the low and very low income level. That's what this was about. I want to point out and that what you're about to see, there were 13 properties in total purchased. Of that, 11 had the purchase price reimbursed with CDBG funds. CDBG funds, although never clearly stated by the clerk, we'll find out is at the heart of the noise that his office continues to create. Rehabilitation costs were a combination of public money and what are known as, it's a state grant proposal called, or program called SHIP. Those funds you're going to see in just a minute. I'm going to start with those because they are so clearly not at issue. There was no mystery about the proper use of the acquisition funds, which is CDBG, and the rehabilitation funds, which are SHIP, coupled with private funds. If we could go to the next, please. It's important to know and understand that SHIP funds were used only in connection with rehabilitation. And not only were there never grounds for review, they haven't been reviewed, and there's a very good reason, and I'm about to show it to you. We're going to start with house number 1. House number 1 was finished by September of 2008. House number 1 was purchased and completely refurbished with private money. There were issues raised by the clerk's office and the county attorney in early 2008, or I guess that's the fall of 2008, concerning house number 1. There are 0 CDBG funds in house number 1. There were SHIP funds used for rehabilitation. This is a memo in the public record from County Attorney Jeff Klatzkow, still our county attorney. You'll note that he makes clear that this was prepared in consultation with both Mr. Barlow and the clerk's office. If we could have the next page, please. Among the many things in this document that you members of the press ought to be looking at is a statement by Mr. Klatzkow in his executive summary that he prepared, that as of October 31, all of the work contemplated by the agreements and the bid specs have been met, and that Mr. Barlow and Home have complied with all staff directions and requests regarding this house number 1. If we could continue, please. These whereases get pretty important, so I'm going to blow it up to just show how out of context your clerk of courts and ours is. So there was an issue raised by the county attorney office and the clerk's office about the prior documentation. So that's why we've got this supplemental agreement in October of 2008. Now, the board decides and adopts, and with the recommendation of the clerk's office and the lawyer for the county, that the sponsor, meaning Home, has completed all work contemplated in the application, bid specs, etc., and has fully complied with all staff directions in this matter. If we could go further. You guys in the press need to get this document and you need to read it, because what it tells you is that these prior documents are now all unified into this October agreement, and that the activities undertaken in connection with this matter are valid and worthwhile county purposes, and that the sponsor should be duly reimbursed for the expenses it incurred. This is October 2008, ladies and gentlemen. If you could go to the next one. Boren, Craig, and Barber, which is one of the most renowned, Boren, Craig, Barber, and Engel, among the most renowned contractors in our area, was approved as the contractor, approved by the Board of County Commissioners, approved by the clerk's office, approved by the county attorney's office in attachment 2 to Mr. Klatzkow's document. Hello? Can we go to, please take note of this. Can we go to the next? This is part of the Clifton Larson Allen report of December 4, 2013. Note what, and now by the way, you've heard people use the word audit in connection with this document. Audit is a very important term of art that auditors use. This is not an audit. You read that document and it makes it very clear that it is a contract for consulting services. It is not an audit. It doesn't call itself an audit. It's illegitimate to try to contend that it's an audit. It's a political document. But look what it says. All payments using SHIP funds intended for eligible rehabilitation activities were made directly from Collier County's HHS department to the contractors providing the goods and services for each of the 13 properties. SHIP proceeds were never received and subsequently spent by Home. We did not review the support behind each of those costs. Why? Because they didn't need to. Because every step of the way when SHIP costs were expended, county employees walked through the real honest-to-goodness homes that existed and verified that the work was done. So all of this nonsense about needing invoices is a complete charade, and it's evilly motivated. Public records establish that the CDBG funds were never used for rehabilitation. They were only used to acquire the property and then to make it easier for the low and very low income people to buy the property by leaving a portion of those funds, the CDBG funds, frankly as well the SHIP funds, as mortgages against the property, so that when the low and very low income people would try to sell their property, the government would be repaid for the funds that were used to make those properties available. I'll show you how that worked right now. First, back in June of 2008, this is the original grant application, and I'm taking selected pages so that you need to see what the records show about what was existing way back in 2008. One of the things that exists, very clear that Melvin Engel is involved in this process from the get-go. By the way, it's sideshow, but there was a competitive low bid. There was an application for bids set out throughout CBIA. There was an independent committee within Home that selected BCBE because they had the lowest and best bid, and they were fully qualified to do this work. And there is no conflict. Originally, it was going to be a bigger project than what it turned out to be. When it came to refurbishing Home, Home talked about using SHIP funds. When it came to acquiring Home, the properties, Home talked about CDBG funds. And when it submitted its budget, it's crystal clear that CDBG funds are being utilized along with private funds to buy the property and to have what's called the subsidy retention, which is the payback mortgage that we're talking about. I'll explain it to you more here in a minute. It's very important to look at the document under which these funds were given. It's a September 23rd, 2008 agreement adopted by the Board of County Commissioners. It points out that the CDBG federal funds have been reprogrammed to apply to the acquisition of land, and that was the big issue that Home wanted to be able to use these funds for. Instead of the 800 and some thousand that was asked for, $427,472.42 were awarded. You'll note when you look at this document that there are discussions about something called design stage, and there's something called construction phase. But they all have these words, if applicable, after them, because they were not applicable. They're only part of the agreement if they apply to the scope of what was going to be done. This construction was not within the scope of the CDBG funds, neither was design. We talk about audits, and you've heard about audit. The agreement specifically provides that Home was not subject to audit, exempt from an audit, because it was a small amount of federal funds. That was our agreement. Under that agreement, we were exempt, which is why you see that the clerk has the power to audit his own internal empire and audit the county. But it had no right under any agreement to come in and audit Home. None whatsoever. Next. All right, here's the big issue that Mr. Brock wants to make, program income. And it's to be utilized to undertake activities specified in Exhibit A. So let's go to Exhibit. Oh, before we go to Exhibit A, let me talk about conflict in the context of CDBG funds. These funds only involve conflict of interest if there's a financial interest, direct or indirect, in the target areas or any parcels. We were buying land. That language says you got a conflict if you have an interest in the land or the parcels. It doesn't say a word, and there is no law or contractual conflict related to BCBE's approved role as a contractor providing rehabilitation services. So Exhibit A, scope of services. This is what Home was authorized to do with its CDBG grant. The purpose of the funding is acquisition of foreclosed properties within Collier County, and Home is requesting funding to provide affordable home ownership opportunities for low and very low qualified families. The rest of Exhibit A is if applicable, and it was not ever applicable. So here's our budget, the budget for acquisition and resale. All right, so what happened? Home buys, all told, 11 properties within the CDGB portion of the grant. But at the moment that this award was granted, Home went out and closed on properties. You may remember house number 1 was bought, rehabbed, and never saw a penny of CDGB funds. There is another home that Home bought that never saw a penny of CDGB funds. Home did go out using its own money and purchased homes, and when it did, it went back to the county with an entire package of information from which it asked for reimbursement. That package included a deed, environmental reports, appraisals, just all the kind of information that the county would need to verify that what was being done with the money was the acquisition of land. So if I could have the first one of these, it was submitted prior to this. What I'm showing you, it looks like it was received by HHS in January of 2009. HHS then sends it on, once it's satisfied, to the finance department. That's your clerk. That's your local clerk's office. And it's asking for $65,000, which is approved. And what is that? That's the purchase price for one of the rundown, blighted homes. And it's identified by property. This is all in the public. If I can go to the next one. The next is another for $57,500. Actually purchased homes. Work started on them is before this. Work is already ongoing because Home bought it. All we're doing now is getting reimbursed. Reimbursed for an $80,000 purchase. No mystery about where this money's going, folks. It's going for the purchase of actual homes. The title is in the name of Home. So a check is cut. That check is cut by the clerk, ladies and gentlemen. The clerk cuts the check for these 3 homes, exactly as the plan was supposed to be. Now, the next application comes in February of 2009. It includes 4 properties, and it is the last application because when you take these 4 properties plus the other 3, you equal $427,000 in the total amount of the grant. So the money's now been spent essentially buying 6 entire properties and about 80% of that property. And again, that money is reimbursing Home for monies it spent to acquire program assets, being the houses. So, this is February. In March, the county asks, okay, you've got the houses. Now house rehabilitation is in process, and the idea is to sell these homes to low and very low income people. And so in order to do that, you take it from a non-code compliant, rundown house that nobody wants, and you fix it up, you rehabilitate it. So, and you don't get income from CDGB programs until you subsequently sell the house. Okay, so right now all there is CDBG authorized expenses in acquiring the house. While they're being rebuilt and refinished, the county wanted to know, and they certainly had a right to know, what are you going to do with the income when you sell these homes? So they asked us in a letter from the county on March 9 of 2009 to explain. They already understand from the application that once the property is acquired by home, renovated, and sold to an income-qualified family, a portion of the CDBG grants were going to remain in the property in order to keep it affordable, and the remainder was going to go back to Home Inc. as program income. This program income is then going to be used by Home in order to purchase new property. Okay, and this is the portion, just for the record, of the agreement that called for this process that we went through. And it says that we need the written approval of the HHS department or as designee, and in Collier County, the designee was the director of the housing department. If we can go to the next slide, please. So Home submitted its plan for use of program income to the director of Collier County's Housing and Human Services Department on March 15, 2009. And again, you can pull this public record. It explains in detail how this whole spread is going to work. If we can go to the next page. We're consistent with Exhibit A. Go to the next page. And here is an easy way to illustrate. This was an attachment to Mr. Barlow's March 2009 letter. And it shows that these are the purchase prices for the properties. Now, by the way, at this time, the project was bigger than what it ended up being. Instead, this is now spreading over 12 properties. One of these properties got dropped because it wasn't suitable. The neighborhood turned out to be not suitable. They did not rehab it. But the CBDG funds, just as you've seen from what was already paid, were used to buy some of the properties, okay? Not all of the properties, because there wasn't enough. The total purchase price for the properties, if you use just these subtotals, are more than the total amount of available grant funds. So the idea behind the plan of program income was to use the program income to expand the scope of the program by buying more houses. And that's what we did, and then spread this retention amount. Now, I'll show you at the end precisely how those numbers all work out, but they come together beautifully, and there's never been a problem with it. On, I believe that's March 16, Mrs. Crumbine, who is the director of Collier County's Housing and Human Services, answers Mr. Barlow's email. If it is acceptable, this is Mr. Barlow, will you forward it to your staff as needed? I have forwarded it to the staff. Plan accepted. That plan was accepted on March 16, 2009. What happened? Well, we rehabbed homes, we sold homes, we accomplished the mission. The world changed, the purposes for Home, as Mr. Barlow explained at the beginning, had met and passed, and there were new programs, much more deeply funded. We were done. So what do? We go back into the county and we say, we're finished, we've done our job, we'd like to turn our grant money over to you. We want to turn the records of the retention over to you so that you know you've got your mortgages in place to recapture these monies if and when anybody sells any of this property. So the county performs a 9-day process of monitoring a closeout. And this is, again, a public record. It finds out the project's completed. It finds out that 11 homes were purchased, which meets the criteria of the grant agreement. It says the expenditure review has been met. And it says there are no findings or concerns. Mission accomplished. But not with this clerk. Harassment starts. Unreasonable request for information. Total failure to do his own diligence to find out what's in the public record, and he starts trying to make Mr. Barlow's life miserable, that and the people at home. Mr. Barlow gets so frustrated that as of March 17 of 2011, he writes to the hotline at HUD, What's he doing here? Who's Kenneth Donahue? At that time, he was the Inspector General for HUD. Mr. Barlow is asking in March of 2001 for Mr. Donahue to send or come to Naples to look at the way the HUD programs are being administered here, because Mr. Brock, this additional level of red tape, read the internal audit efforts of the clerk. So I'm just going to show you some examples of what's in the record here, but look at the dates. We're way back in 2011. We're standing here in 2014 on a project that was totally satisfied, easily understandable, and finished in 2010. All right, so what's happened here is this is the grant manager of the county writing back to the internal auditor out of Brock's office. This part of this document, you need to find this document, you need to read and understand this document. This is Brock's complaints, or that they had in a so-called management alert, and in the italicized portion is the response from the county. Home isn't involved in this exchange. So back in July of 2011, you got Brock's office getting it all messed up. They write on January 13, there's a second agreement to further support activities by granting $150,000 of SHIP funds. Well, they missed the first agreement. And so what's happening here is in the first paragraph, the county reminds the clerk's office that there was an original agreement for $50,000. Under that agreement, that home was paid $44,727. That's that first one we talked about that you saw earlier where Mr. Klaskow, working with the clerk's office, approved it. This property was not acquired with CDBG funds and is not one of the 11 properties analyzed for program income. They know this back in 2011. The agreement made with Home with respect to the SHIP funds was for the purpose of rehabbing the 11 properties. Collier County paid directly for this work. That's the same conclusion that Clifton Larson Allen makes in its political document of December 4, 2013. Clerk's office is told again back in 2011 that SHIP funds are paid directly, so there are no issues. They were all accounted for by the county. Home didn't ever touch those funds. So the clerk complains unable to reconcile program-generated income. But they say because of the financial statements of Home. And the county says, well, you may not get them from the financial statements of Home, but the HUD settlement statements contain all of this information. The information contained on the settlement statements has been verified with these additional documents. So essentially what the county is saying is, you've got all this information. What are you talking about? You go further, we're still discussing program income. We do not believe there is any program income since Home Barlow's expenses to acquire and sell the 11 subject properties exceeded the proceeds by at least $24,500. Now what we'll show you before we're done is that there was a whole lot more unreimbursed expenses that Home incurred with respect to the acquisition of these homes that more than offset any program income in anybody's wildest dream. All grant-related expenditures paid by Collier County would have been submitted to and reviewed by finance prior to payment. Those were the applications for payments on the homes themselves. So Mr. Barlow realizes that Mr. Brock just doesn't get it or doesn't want to get it. So he writes him a letter and he explains this all very clearly. And this is why program income is really part of why it's not an issue. But this points out again that $436,000 worth of Home funds were used and only $427,472 were reimbursed with CDBG grant funds. Now, we're still getting requests for information from the internal auditor. Mr. Barlow is still reminding them that we've given you all the information to show you exactly where that money went. Same situation, he writes in August to Ms. Kearns that he's given you he reminds them that they're entitled to a reduced scope audit. Unfortunately, it seems this thing is never completed. What are you looking for? We simply are uncertain what else there is that relates to the CDBG grant, because the CDBG grant bought property. Now, Brock's office, in December of 2011, he doesn't like to admit it, but it's from his office, everything is in order. And that's Alice Kearns, December 7, 2011. Thanks, John. It appears that everything is in order. They've got anything and everything they were wanting as of December 7, 2011, and more than they were entitled to at that date. So what's next? Internal Audit writes a report. Now, please understand the context of this is the clerk has every right in the world and arguably has quite the duty to make sure county government is doing what county government is supposed to do. So they issue this audit report, and if we can go to the next page, the audit report confirms, Ms. Kearns confirms, it's been working with HHVS staff and Mr. Barlow, the Vice President of Home, to gather all records necessary to complete our review. On December 6th, that was Mr. Barlow's email, Home furnished additional records for 11 of the 13 properties rehabilitated. And again, it was 11 because 11 were the only ones relevant to CDBG. So, we didn't like it, pain in the neck, but it's over, and life moves on. Oh, by the way, right in the middle of all of this, two things have happened. Gina Downs, a member of the Board of Home, has filed and run against Georgia Hiller, and John Barlow has filed to run against Dwight Brock for Clerk of the Courts. So this thing stayed silent. How is it that we're here in 2014 having to deal with this craziness? Oh, by the way, please read, in his public relations publication, Mr. Brock's office gives you a link to this. Take a look at the February 2012 report, because there's no issues. So why are we here? Well, it would just so happen, unfortunately from my perspective, Mr. Brock won that election. And as a result of that, he was in power. Also, unfortunately, from my perspective, other members of that board won, and they became the majority of the board, affiliated in all respects with Mr. Brock. So Brent Batten of the Naples Daily News on April 21 writes an article about a agenda item that Mr. Coyle has put on the agenda, and that has to do with the clerk's review of a settlement that the county made with the individuals called the Blockers. And I just want to urge you to get the notes from that audit, ladies and gentlemen of the press, and ask yourself what's up with this clerk. Next. So what happens? Mr. Coyle has asked on item 10E on the agenda for April 23, 2013, for a discussion of the Clerk of Court's audit of the Blockers' legal fees in reference to the settlement agreement. The rest of this stuff was put on after the meeting, and you'll see, as I show it to you in a minute, that the only published item on 10E was this. But the commission decided to vote and resurrect the issue of home. So, oh, by the way, could you go back for just a second? See Mr. Oak's comments here. This is item 10 on your agenda. It's a discussion of Blockers' legal fees. You'll note, if you look at the agenda, there isn't a single mention of home anywhere on this agenda. But Mr. Coyle is trying to tweak our clerk's nose here with what Mr. Coyle thought was an exceedingly inadequate review of over $500,000 of county funds. If we can go on. So those notes, Chairwoman Hiller says, are they going to be part of the record? This is Mr. Brock's notes. And he kind of says he's given them to Mr. Coyle and Mr. Batten, but he's happy to forward it, and you members of the press ought to see him. So now, all of a sudden, Chairman Hiller, on April 23 of 2013, decides to go into a completely unpublished, unnoticed issue. She wants to go back to something that Mr. Brock mentioned in his performance. And he's talking about, in the course of conducting your audit of home, your audit indicated, if we can go to the next page, substantial expenditures were uncorroborated. Now, at this point, Mr. Brock knows, well, let me just finish this out, because you'll see what happens on April 23 is Ms. Hiller resurrects home. She makes complaints about lack of documentary evidence with what happened with respect to program income. This has been going on for months and months and months. It ended with the report of February 2012. There was nothing going on for months and months and months. And so Commissioner Henning joins in and asks that they direct the county manager to request documents from the officers of home. If you could, please. So why now? Not on the public agenda, action taken without notice to anyone. I would suggest to you they're trying to get back at Mr. Coyle for the embarrassment of the Blocker situation. They're trying to get back at Barlow for challenging Brock, running against him. They're trying to get back at board member Gina Downs. Why is Mr. Henning asking for the whole board to be responsible? They're trying to take down political opponents. And they want to get back at both Ms. Downs and Mr. Barlow because they were the complainants of the successful ethics complaint against Mr. Henning. He had to pay a $500 fine. So now, at some point in this process, and I'll get in a minute why I'm being so vague, I'd like to know exactly at what point, but at some point, Brock hires an outside consultant. We don't know how much in taxpayer funds he's wasted, but we know he's wasted a bunch, and we're going to find out. So, Clifton Larson Allen writes a report on December 4 of 2013. And what did they write? I challenge you folks, look at this letter and find the word audit anywhere. It's not in here. It's not an audit. He's a consultant. He's providing consulting services. And to do what? Investigate and identify program income. So he wasn't even retained to do some of the gratuitous harm that Mr. Brock has made with respect to this conflict of interest. You'll see in here, I call it phony and manipulating, suggesting that these could be potential conflicts of interest. The actual word in the Clifton Larson Allen report is that there could be potential conflicts of interest. There could be an infinity of things. It doesn't make anything so. So the Clifton Larson Allen people are honest enough to put in the proper language in terms of because program income, ladies and gentlemen, is only with respect to CDBG funds. It has nothing to do with SHIP. So he points out, as I did earlier to you, that if you got a conflict, it's if you've got a conflict in the target areas or parcels, and no one has ever suggested that. And then it says, based on the documentation, we've identified certain relationships that could be construed as potential. That is so far, that would never be admissible in a court of law. It's a million miles from anything that is reliable for anyone to conclude that anybody had any kind of conflict of any kind or nature. There were none. So here's the most important part, and the part that the clerk can't live with. The CLA folks recognize that Home Program Income Expenditure Plan approved in March of 2009 was for CDGB eligible activities. If we could have the next one. Take a look at don't take my word for this, go to the December 4 letter and you'll see that these words are here. It recounts the March 9, the March 15 that you've already just been shown, and it says these are CDGB eligible activities to spend program income. Why are we wasting our time here? So Barlow sent a public letter, which Brock and his allies kept out of sight, on January 10th. And I want you to read it. I don't want to read it for you. I just want to tell you that virtually everything I've shared with you is there to be found. Barlow again asks for an HUD investigation in his letter. Can you go to the page before? Just want to make sure everybody sees and understands. Okay, now next one. Okay, next one. And the next one. Well, in that letter, just trust me and read it, he again suggests that we get a HUD investigation. Barlow explains why this is all nonsense. And again, he points out the fact that there were $270,000 of home funds used to purchase the 11 subject properties, which were above and beyond the 427. And we got a graph to show it to you here in a moment. All right, so nevertheless, Brock goes to press. And there's his press release. He makes specific reference to his internal audit report of 2012, which I wish you would go and look at. He calls this a follow-up audit report. That is a mischaracterization. Clifton Larson Allen did not have an audit report, but he sends this out and publishes it to the world. And you need to ask yourself, why is he doing that? Why is the clerk of the court sending that kind of press release out? All right, so then he makes his presentation to the board on home program income. And all I can say is read it in light of what you've just seen, and you'll see that it's all false light. I'm going to show you something in a moment where he says that there was a call for a return for money. That's just flat false. There's no return. He talks about lack of support of construction costs. There's no reference to any duty, and there's no serious issue with respect to construction costs. And he fails to honestly address the conflict issue, because he puts up stuff like this. This was from his report. It's false light. Then he goes on and he says, for the consumption of all you folks in the press, I'm going to get my big boy pants on, and he wants others to jump in there with him and go to law enforcement. So, and you should read this in the transcript, because he threatens, he wants to report this to law enforcement. And then I just want to point out one other thing, because you've got Commissioner Hiller chiming in here. Look at this. Very clearly that $635,000 approximately is what's owed by this entity. You got to start asking yourself, what is wrong with these people? Where does that come from? Where does any of this come from? The answer is something going on between Commissioner Hiller's ears that the rest of the universe doesn't understand. So she feels too it's got to go to law enforcement. Now, I'm going to pass the baton here in a minute, and we're going to get into the details of the actual homes. I just wanted to point out to you that Mr. Barlow, back on the 14th of February, asked to learn everything that had happened between the clerk and Clifton Larson Allen. How did they get hired? What was the scope of what they did? How much were they paid? And all we've gotten back is, oh, thanks, I got your request. We'll respond in a reasonable time. Well, you know, it's already a reasonable time. We're here on the 8 days later, 9 days later. It makes no sense that we've heard nothing. None of these documents are available. You folks want to see these documents too. With that, because of the threat of criminal activity, Home Board was forced to look for lawyers who have great experience in white-collar crime. I'm not one of those lawyers, but I'm going to turn the dais over to somebody who is. Her name is Nicole Wade. We'll be available to answer questions in a moment. I'll stay here, but I want to move through this process. Nicole is with the Retzel firm, and she is going to walk us through much more detail about the before and after of these actual homes.